The Lost Paintings of J.M. Allen. I could call them lost. Other people might say they were stolen. In fact, they were stored in the attic of a friend, someone I lived with for very many years. I actually built the attic as a conversion, putting in the loft floor, lining the ceiling and electricity, and the arrangement was we were to have half each, some for my stuff, some for her stuff. Then, after many visits to the house, I put in a loft ladder. Shortly afterwards, the lady said, "I have stolen her screwdriver. Therefore, I should go and live on my boat." So I did that. And shortly afterwards, from what I heard, all my personal effects, over many years, stuff plus about 150 paintings, were all given away. I have no idea what happened to them. So I thought anyway, as a remembrance of these pictures, I would make this little video. I might explain a little bit about how I started painting. Initially, it was making copies of old masters, just as a hobby. And then I always thought that an oil painting was worth more in the viewer's view than, say, a photograph. Although really I always liked taking photographs. So I converted many of my photographs into paintings, along with any painting or picture or photo I happened to see in a magazine, or you know how it is. If you're art, you just like being creative and making things. So many of the paintings are based on pictures from magazines or whatever, and many are based on originals. A little bit like a life story, going back to the days with the Royal Air Force when I was in Malta, and up through various travels through Bolivia and living in seaside places and stuff like that. Anyway, I shall shortly present the actual pictures and perhaps give a little commentary on the titles of them. Okay, my favourite was called The Umbrella Girl. That is a picture from a glossy magazine, I suppose, which I converted into an artwork. And that I've given title number one. So we can start at number one, which is The Umbrella Girl. It's about 16 by 12, I think, is the size. Not too large and not too small, very convenient size. Others, 20 by 30, they will come out full screen. And others, although they're even quite small, 10 by 8, they will come out full screen as well. It just depends what fits the format of the movie or slideshow. This little picture is only a 10 by 8. It is based on a photograph a student I met in Cambridge gave me, and it was originally taken in a traditional costume in a professional photographer's studio, I suppose back in Japan. And as I quite like oriental things, I thought it would be suitable to make into a painting. The next picture is a larger picture in the days from Malta when I took a trip over to Syracuse, and that was the ferry which came and went from Malta to Syracuse. After that we were followed by one of my favourites, a large 20 by 30 inch painting of one of the Maltese harbour craft being repaired in Malta. Another 20 by 30 inch painting is called Family Outing, and I actually owned one of these boats for a while in Malta. It was a bit heavy to row, and most of the harbour ones these days have little outboard motors on them. This is followed by a 12 by 16 painting from some photograph I found called Artist at Saint-Michel in France. I've been to Saint-Michel in France and found it quite interesting. Didn't spot any artists like this hanging around, but I thought it would make a nice painting. This is followed by In Shackleton's Wake, again another photograph of some glaciers in Antarctica. Next we have, I think it's probably called Girls with Hat or Girls with Flowers, to be followed by, this is actually a small picture, it's a copy of a Welsh landscape which I quite took a fancy to. Now we have a 10 by 8 picture called Seashells. That is one of the few paintings I have left, and that is with me on my boat here, which is currently in Spain. Next we have a series of 3 paintings based upon photographs in a cookery book. The first one is Pumpkin Pie. The next one I quite like because it has a still life in the front and the picture of a window in the background. And the third one was some fish dish, I think this was called. Again, the idea is you have the still life in the foreground and a bit of a landscape in the background. Now we have a small painting. It's only 10 by 8. It's based on an old-time picture called The Wreck of the Glen Bervie, followed by quite a large painting, an oriental type piece of work, probably copied from a photograph or something I took a fancy to. As I mentioned already, I quite like oriental things. So let's follow this with something from Holland, which is was originally a little photograph in a newspaper, a Dutch landscape with windmills. This one now is Carriage in Gretna Green, based upon a photograph I took when I went up to Scotland for a weekend in a car. And we stopped off at Gretna Green and saw these old carriages, and I thought it was a good subject for a painting. Following that, we have Down at the Old Granta, which is a pub, very famous pub in Cambridge, which I used to frequent on very many visits in the old days. This is a bit of a made-up painting, a small 10 by 8 with a copy of some classical figure in the foreground and a bit of a made-up landscape in the background. Next we have one from my Maltese series, from one of my own photographs, which is, I think this is called The Peanut Vendor. 24 by 18, I think it might have been in size, followed by a similar one, which was The Nugget Seller. Again, a photograph I took in Malta at some nighttime festival. Both of these paintings got left behind in my travels to Bolivia. Next we have a small picture called Gaff Cutter, which is self-explanatory, followed by a painting which has got to be based on a photograph because it's the American spy plane called Blackbird. Next, a little, I think this is also not 10 by 8, but slightly larger, could be about 14 inches long, an old-time ship scene in Glasgow based upon an actual painting, so that's a little bit of a copy of that one. Back to Malta again with another 24 by 18 picture called The Carriage. They have all these traditional carriages showing the tourists around in Malta, and very attractive for photographs and for paintings. Followed by The Polo Players, based on one of my photographs from the Polo Club at Malta. Next, a little picture of some flamingos, which can be viewed right way up or upside down in case there's a mistake in hanging, because it has a nice reflection in the water. Again, next one is a little bit of a made-up picture with a couple of classical figures in the foreground and a made-up landscape in the background. This is followed by another one of my favourites, just some old-time ships in the corner of some harbour somewhere. Fishing boats at Hastings, a 16 by 12 inch painting, and the next one is an old-fashioned RAF biplane in flight, obviously from a photograph. Well, obviously, unless I had a parachute to take a sketch. Next one was Newmarket Polo Club, a couple of polo players there. This one here is an art gallery that used to exist in Heffer's bookshop in Cambridge on the top floor. So here we have a picture of the gallery, and inside I've put a few paintings, and one of the models has got out one of the paintings and having a look around at the exhibits. Next we have 3 nudes on a beach, and then we have a picture called Shy Girl. This was a girl in Malta who did not want to have her photograph taken, so put her head down and consequently became the Shy Girl. The next one is a little 10 by 8 mermaid, which I have with me on my boat appropriately, followed by a copy of a classical type picture. I'm not quite sure if the background was a classical one or just a made up one. Next, a ship boat with a lighthouse in the background, 12 by 16, which I was quite fond of. And then we have a little Maltese harbour craft in Malta. The next one is a copy of a classical horse picture. Then some Dutch boats, another 16 by 12. And the one after that is another little favourite, a Thames barge, I quite often used to like to see the Thames barges where they were laid up in St Catherine's Dock in London. Of course, this one is based on a photo. The next one, also from one of my own photos, is the cannon boy, seen again in the days in Malta. Next one is a girl which I have called Psychedelia, followed by another girl that did some posing on a couch somewhere or other. Another one, girl by a whirl, probably a picture from a magazine, followed by a scene of some boats at Wivenhoe, which I think is a town somewhere around about Colchester on the southeast coast of England. Next one, I think I called that Doña Flor. I have no idea why I called it Doña Flor. It just sounded like a good name at the time. Now we come to another polo playing picture. This was called the Rundle Cup. I actually did win a cup playing polo in Malta, and I think it was called the Rundle Cup, so I can't see how I managed to take the picture and play in the picture at the same time, but there we have it. Then there were a couple of pictures in a newspaper of bullfighting which caught my eye. Maybe not appropriate for paintings these days, but there they are anyway. Followed by a girl in a kind of ballet pose. And then we come to a picture of pumpkins. I always used to like taking photographs of fruit and fruit stalls, fruit and vegetables, and the colours and things, even though I am colourblind, as the saying goes. So here we have some gourds, based upon pumpkins, sorry, not gourds, pumpkins based upon a photo of pumpkins taken originally in Cambridge Market and appropriate for a November night. This time we have some gourds in a basket. Now we come to a picture I made. Layings, the construction company, they had an art competition. So at the time they were rebuilding Addenbrooke's Hospital, the old Addenbrooke's Hospital, that is the original one in Cambridge. And this was a picture I took and made into a painting. It didn't get anywhere with the art competition. And neither did the next one. I think the next one I also put in as a second attempt, and that didn't get anywhere. Anyway, not to worry, it's the taking part that counts, as they say. Now we have another picture called Storming Along, where I attempted to capture the nature of the sea on a stormy day if we're out in a small boat. And here we have a picture of the Royalist, the British sail training vessel with gun ports painted along the side, which has also appeared in many movies as a kind of pirate ship. Jug, Ship and Castle, another bit of a made-up painting with, as the name says, Jug. The ship is a gaff cutter from, say, the east coast of England, and the castle is more reminiscent of Cyprus, where I was based once upon a time. But sometimes we have to have a bit of imagination making up something in the way of painting. And so that brings me to the next one, which is a model laying on her side. The idea is based on one of the famous paintings in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. But in this case, the model I put in the front and the background is a bit made up along the lines of the typical classic kind of painting that they did have in the museum. The next one is the potato wagon. This, many years ago, used to appear on the corner of the Guildhall building in Cambridge. And I always used to like taking candid photographs, and in particular of street scenes. I always found that kind of topic very interesting. Then, once upon a time, I had some students, and some little Japanese girls asked me if they could paint something. So I gave them some leaves in a pond to paint, and they did start it off quite well. Then they left and went back to Japan, so I had to finish it off myself. And also made this other very small painting of the cat and the little souvenir box and the mirror. Now, I do remember around that time I did participate in a course called A-Level Art and Design at one of the colleges in Cambridge. And the project which we were supposed to hand in, for my part, I made a presentation of 8 boards, A1 sized boards, and I called it The Relationship Between Photography and Painting in art. And in this series of boards, I attempted to explain how photographs had been used, in fact, over the centuries, or rather the camera obscura, that is to say, the projection of an image onto a wall. And later, when people were able to develop and print photographs, these were also traditionally used as a basis for painting. So there's nothing new about doing that today, although some people seem to expect that every painting should be done from a sketch. The truth is that over the centuries, people, for example, designing the roof of the Sistine Chapel would make a sketch, and they would transfer the image from the sketch to the ceiling of the chapel, and then sort of colour it in. The big disadvantage of painting from life, the advantage is that it gives you a more lifelike kind of painting, and the disadvantage is that it takes such a long time, if you have a large work of art, to set everything out, and then if you get it wrong, to have to start again back at the beginning or rub out bits and keep altering bits. Whereas if you've got an image that you can make or alter in photography or today with digital art, that gives you something that cuts a lot of time down, and it's the way of working that I personally like. Such a scheme was also put forward, or the history of making pictures from projected images was recently the subject of a TV documentary also. And the name of the presenter was the famous British artist, David Hockney. Now, my efforts at the time were not too well received, and I didn't get a very high mark, but I do remember one of the students asking the teacher a question. If we paint a picture of an orange, is it meant to look like an orange, or is it meant to look like something else? And the eventual outcome of the so-called art class teaching thing, whatever you want to call it, was that the person with the highest marks was a boy who set out some washing on a washing line between two trees, took a photograph and handed it in, and that got the highest marks in the class. But I suppose that's what you call contemporary art, and I think the teacher was more in favour of contemporary art than traditional art. So from around that time also, here we have a largish painting of mine of a student looking into the entrances of one of the famous Cambridge colleges. Most of these colleges have courtyards, and they have entrances where you can look through the outer entrance into the entrance to the middle courtyard, of the middle courtyard into a further courtyard, and so on. And after that, we have a picture which is meant to become the island of the Sirens. It has as a main building the Cambridge Fitzwilliam College, and the rest of it is a bit made up with a little bit of a classical scene in the open windows and in the swimming pool, etc. You might even say it's probably another unfinished painting. It's quite difficult to know when a painting is finished. I think this one clearly is unfinished. And again, from that period, an art student friend of mine playing the piano with a few made-up elements. Nude with seashell. I have this one with me here on the boat in the cupboard somewhere because there's no space to hang it in a small boat. So that makes a total of 3 paintings, which I have left out of a total of probably 150 to 180 that I had previously. This one is another gaff cutter called the Saxonia, followed by a painting of a model. The vase is taken from some sketches I made in the Fitzwilliam Museum, and the idea of the background is also from classical pictures in the Fitzwilliam Museum. Back to these pictures of bollies, as they're called, by the seaside. One is a 10 by 8 and the other is a 24 by 18 or something like that. And it's interesting to do the same picture at different sizes on canvas board that is, just for comparison to see how they come out. Then whilst in Mallorca, I met a girl on the beach, a German tourist who offered to pose for some photographs, and I happen to like pictures with umbrellas, one of my favourite themes. Now this one is actually called Doña Flor, so the earlier picture called Doña Flor must be called something else. Here we have Torquay, but not Torquay as you know it, as probably the sky is too blue and the sea too blue. Too many holidays in Spain, I guess, must have been the reason for that. But they did have down there little harbourside cafes I used to frequent. So in this picture we have the owner proudly sitting by the door in the front of the cafe, and Sir Francis Drake just popped by. You can see him sitting there having a coffee at the left-hand side. Next we have some old-style Brixham trawlers, then more Thames barges at sea. Now we have one of my favourite portraits of Lan Sang, a Chinese woman who would pose for some paintings and take them away as soon as the paint was almost dry. And here we have Lan Sang in blue, the first one being Lan Sang in red, and now Lan Sang on the steps. This little picture, which is a 10 by 8, was called the Maria Assumpta, and I think this boat had an unfortunate ending in being wrecked on the northern coast of Cornwall. And another very small painting is called The Loss of the Mary Agnes. Now we have a picture of a mermaid. It's called Mermaid in Palace. Again, the influence of the Fitzwilliam Museum comes in with a little bit of made-up background. And a German girl modelling on the rocks in Mallorca. And another one laying on her side with a basket on one of the famous beaches. And another little nude with a fancy hat, just from some fancy picture that I found in a magazine somewhere. Here we have a sculpture in bronze, which I saw in the entrance to a doorway of some shop in Mallorca, and I thought that in itself would be good for a painting. And that leads us on to a couple of versions of it's a nude on a pillbox, being a pillbox was at a very famous beach called S Strenk down in the southeast corner of Mallorca, one of the most beautiful places I have ever been to. And this is a girl who was working in a bar in Mallorca, and she told me her ambition was to be a captain of a sailing boat. Unfortunately, I now have a sailing boat, but I'm about 40 years too late. However, we now have a girl working in another coffee bar, and followed by another portrait attempt of a woman who I met in the Spanish class in Totnes down in Devon. And now another little nude looking out of a window, followed by a nude with a red background from some glamour magazine. And then we move on to Ibiza, where there was a famous bar in San Antonio. It's called the Don Quixote Bar. The owner actually was a bit of a patron of the arts, and he lived in Barcelona, and he would sometimes invite artists to put paintings on the walls there. So every picture tells a little bit of a story. So in this one we have the outside front of the bar and a loving couple in the darkness around the corner and a cat crossing in the foreground. And that brings us on to two paintings of Pagliacci, because in Cambridge there used to be, probably is still there, a cafe called Clowns, and the owner was very fond of Italian opera. So every year he would have a little painting competition, and I think it was meant to be for children really. So for 2 or 3 years I would put in some paintings, the first one being a very large painting of the theme of the Pagliacci clowns, and in the second painting I took the clowns off the stage and put them into his cafe. And there was also a third picture of some clowns, but I no longer have a copy of that one. Now we have a picture of Lisa, who was the producer-director who made the film with me called Atlantis in the Andes. That was way back in the year 2000 with the Discovery Channel. And this one is a little Uru girl based on a photograph from a book. I was presented with this book when I was in Oruro, a city in Bolivia, and the book is called Oruro Inmortal. Then we move on to some paintings based on pictures I took at the Oruro Carnival, the big photo festival which happens every year in the city of Oruro. So we have two of the Oruro girls, another girl with a bit of colourful background, and then a kind of a devil girl, the devil being a popular theme for the miners in the city of Oruro. And this one is actually a picture of a miner lighting a fuse. I was asked by the president of the Miners Association to make for them a painting to give them something to remember me by, and this was what I came up with. Then we have a couple little boat pictures again. I think one of them's a botter and one's just a gaff cutter or something like that. And then we have a girl, type of Thailand girl, who looks a bit like a girl by the sea. Another Bolivian figure, and this is followed by two small still lifes painted from the subject, just a little bit of made up pictures. And now we move on to Cambridge. This is a scene down at Magdalen Bridge, or Magdalene Bridge as some other people like to call it, followed by a corner, street scene, corner man with a saxophone in Mallorca. Then we go on to a gaff cutter sailing off the Isle of Wight in England, followed by a bunch of apples hanging from a tree. Now we come to a larger picture, which is a picture of Venice, based on a photograph, of course, that I took whilst I was a few days out there in Venice. And this one is a kind of an artist at work. And here is in a street scene, which I saw in one of the streets in Mallorca. Then we move on to a barrow full of lemons, and then we have a very small painting, a 10 by 8, of some telephone boxes outside St. Mary's Church in Cambridge, followed by a picture of some gourds, and then we come to the ice cream seller, who is a girl working in an ice cream kiosk in Torquay, followed by a horse's head, which is a photograph I just took a fancy to, and as I happen to like horses, I made it into a painting. And then we have another bit of a made-up painting of a few bits of fruit and a kind of jug thing. And that brings us now to a picture which is meant to be the Incas on top of a mountain, the Atlantis mountain in Pampayagas, Bolivia. The Incas I saw in the Oruro Carnival and transposed them onto the mountain, thinking it might be appropriate for a painting. This is followed by some boys playing the flutes. These again are a scene from the famous carnival that happens every year around about February time in Oruro in Bolivia. Back now to Mallorca with a typical street scene from Mallorca. And this is followed by a small window, picture of a small window in Ibiza, and another window, but this time closed windows in Ibiza. And here we have the setting sun in Ibiza. There is a place in San Antonio where people go in the evenings, they all gather at a cafe and they all watch the sun go down. After that, you have another Ibiza scene, just a street scene with somebody sitting under an umbrella and looking a bit blue in the high blue sky and reflected. Okay. This time something a little bit different, and these are 3 sketches that I made when I went down to Ramsgate. So this is Ramsgate and this one is Broadstairs. At that time I went down and put some paintings in a gallery in Ramsgate for about a week or so. So I made these sketches with I think it was a Pentel handwriting pen, and a little bit of coloured up with coloured pencils afterwards. Then we have a painting based on a photo taken at one of the street markets in Barcelona. Very colourful arrangement of fruit. And after that we have another tray of fruit. These are getting into the stage of being unfinished type of paintings, more fruit seen on a bar counter in Barcelona, and a corner of a coffee bar called the Borne bar, I think it was, in the region called Borne in Barcelona. A couple of lads playing the guitar in Barcelona. The reason the paintings may appear to jump around from place to place is because that is more or less the order they were painted in, and perhaps one can see some change of style from the copying the classical paintings in the very early stages to somewhat more of one's own style and somewhat more of a type of unfinished type of work in the later stages. So to round up and finish off, we have here a bit of a made-up painting with a type of classical theme based on influences from the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. And we go back now to some of the earlier copies that I made in the very first attempt at painting. We had a copy of Napoleon Bonaparte crossing the Alps. I think that was by David. And then a copy of a Hussar, originally by Géricault. Then we come to a painting, I think it's called The Rape of the Sabine Woman. That might have been, is it a Rubens? Next little painting was a charming little picture. It was called The Beaufort Hunt. Then we have a type of oriental bathing scene, and I can't remember if that was Mani. I don't think it was Mani. In fact, I just can't remember who it was right offhand. But you can always look them up for yourself. The same with the girl with the jug of water pouring into a pool. We have afterwards a little copy of a Gauguin. Then we have Diana the Huntress. Was that Renoir? Can't remember. Any of the next ones I remember. That was a thing called The Bathers. That is going to be followed by a little Madonna and Child. Another painting which is based on a classical painting, the name of which completely escapes me, and yet a classical landscape along the same lines. That's all I can say about the paintings for the moment. My name is Jim Allen, and I am the author of a book called Atlantis, the Andes Solution, and various other books about the site of Atlantis in Bolivia in South America. Well, I hope you enjoyed my presentation of my now lost paintings, and who knows, if you don't paint already, you may even be encouraged to take it up. Why not have a go yourself?